The smell of wet earth and crushed ferns hangs heavy in the air, a thick, sweet perfume that clings to the skin in the eternal humidity of the Mexican Gulf Coast. Here, the canopy is so dense that the light of midday arrives only as a soft emerald gloom, filtered through layers of mahogany and ceiba trees that have stood as silent witnesses to the rise and fall of empires. The ground beneath one's feet is a carpet of decaying leaves and ancient silt, hiding secrets that have remained undisturbed for thousands of years. It is a land where the border between the earth and the water is often blurred, where the rivers wind like serpents through the lowlands, depositing the rich volcanic soil that once fed a forgotten people. In the year 1862, a farm worker in the region of Tres Zapote was clearing a patch of this stubborn jungle, his machete rhythmic against the tangled vines. He struck something hard, something that did not yield like wood or stone. As he cleared away the mud and the creeping roots, a massive, rounded surface began to emerge from the shadows of the soil. It was not a mere boulder, but a face, a colossal human face carved from dark basalt, staring out from the depths of time with an expression of profound, unmoving calm. The lips were full, the nose broad, and the eyes were wide and steady, gazing toward a horizon that had long since changed. This was the first of the Olmec colossal heads to be revealed to the modern world, a silent titan weighing many tons, buried up to its forehead in the debris of centuries. The sheer scale of the discovery was enough to stagger the mind. These were not statues in the traditional sense, but massive disembodied portraits, some standing nearly 10 feet tall and weighing as much as 40 tons. They were carved from single blocks of volcanic stone, transported over vast distances through swamp and forest without the use of the wheel or beasts of burden. How these ancient people moved such immense weights across the treacherous terrain of the Veracruz lowlands remains one of the great enigmas of archaeology. We speak of the Olmec now as the Mother Culture of Mesoamerica, the foundational society that predates the Maya and the Aztecs by 1,000 years, yet in 1862 they were a ghost, a name lost to the winds of history. As you settle in for the night and let the weight of the day drift away, I want to welcome you to this quiet space. Here at the Slumber Archives, we gather every evening to explore the shadowed corners of our past, bringing you new history narrations just like this one every single day. If you find comfort in these journeys through time, perhaps you might consider subscribing so that we can meet here again tomorrow night. A simple like on this video also helps other weary travelers find their way to our fireside. But for now, let the world outside fade into the distance as we return to the humid twilight of the Mexican jungle. The discovery at Tres Zapotes sparked a debate that has simmered for over a century, a quiet controversy that touches on the very origins of civilization in the Americas. When the first explorers and scholars gazed upon those heavy features, they saw something that did not fit their established maps of the world. The facial characteristics, the broad noses and thick lips, reminded many of the peoples of distant Africa, leading to whispers of ancient trans-oceanic voyages that predated Columbus by millennia. Was it possible that the currents of the Atlantic had carried travelers from the Nile or the Niger to these shores? Or were these features a stylized representation of the local inhabitants, a specific aesthetic choice made by master craftsmen 3,000 years ago? The Olmec themselves left no written records that we can easily decipher, no scrolls or books to explain their lineage. Instead, they left these silent sentinels, carved with such precision that the individual headgear, helmets or headdresses unique to each stone, suggests they were portraits of specific rulers rather than gods. To understand them, we must look to the stratigraphy, a term archaeologists use to describe the layers of earth that act as a timeline of the world. By studying the way the soil settles over time and using tools like radiocarbon dating, which measures the decay of carbon atoms, to tell us how long ago a piece of charcoal or wood was part of a living thing. We have placed the height of the Olmec civilization between 1200 and 400 years before the Common Era. And yet, the dates only deepen the mystery. These heads appeared seemingly out of nowhere, fully formed in their artistic sophistication. There are no practice heads, no crude precursors that show the evolution of their skill. It is as if they stepped onto the stage of history already possessing the knowledge of stoneworking and complex social organization. Some researchers have even looked further back, toward the end of the last ice age in the period known as the Younger Dryas, a time of cataclysmic climate shifts nearly 12,000 years ago. They wonder if the Olmec were not the beginning, but a beautiful, late flowering remnant of an even older, lost tradition that has been scrubbed from the earth by rising seas and the relentless growth of the jungle. As the years passed and more heads were unearthed at sites like San Lorenzo and La Venta, the mystery only expanded. Each head is unique, yet they all share that same haunting, stoic gaze. They were often found buried in specific patterns, or even intentionally defaced and then interred, as if the act of burying them was a ritual in itself, a way of returning the power of the ruler back to the earth. We find ourselves standing on the edge of a vast ocean of time, looking at these basalt giants and realizing how little we truly know. The jungle is a patient keeper of secrets, and for every head we have found, one cannot help but wonder how many more lie hidden beneath the roots of the mahogany trees, waiting in the cool, dark soil for someone to find them, once again. The basalt itself tells a story of incredible labor. The stone originated in the Tuxtla Mountains, over 50 miles away from where the heads were eventually placed. Without iron tools, the Olmec shaped these boulders using only stone hammers and abrasives, grinding away at the volcanic rock until the features of a king emerged. Then, they moved them. Some believe they used massive rafts to float the stones during the flood seasons, navigating the complex network of rivers that veins the Gulf Coast. Others imagine thousands of men hauling the stones on sledges through the mud, a slow and agonizing procession through the heat. The sheer will required to move 40 tons of rock through a swamp speaks of a society with a singular driving vision. In the quiet of the night, it is easy to imagine the scene, the rhythmic sound of stone striking stone, the chanting of the workers as they strained against the ropes, and the heavy, humid air of the Gulf. The Olmec were the first to build pyramids in the Americas, the first to develop a complex calendar, and perhaps the first to play the ritual ball game that would become a hallmark of Mesoamerican life. Yet, they remain elusive, a civilization defined by what they left behind, rather than what they said. They are the foundation upon which the Maya built their celestial mathematics and the Aztecs built their island city, but the Olmec themselves stayed close to the earth, carving their legacy into the very bones of the world. As we contemplate these ancient faces, the African connection remains a subject of intense fascination and fierce debate. While mainstream science suggests the features are a reflection of the indigenous people of the region, the visual parallels continue to draw the eye and the imagination toward the sea. It is a reminder that our understanding of the past is always shifting, like the silt in a riverbed. We are constantly rediscovering what was once known and then forgotten. The limits of our knowledge are not fixed. They are merely the boundaries of what we have managed to dig up from the mud so far. The Gulf Coast remains a place of deep shadows and ancient whispers, even now as the modern world encroaches on the edges of the jungle. The spirit of the Olmec feels present in the stillness of the trees and the slow movement of the water. They remind us of the transience of power and the permanence of stone. They remind us that even the greatest empires can be swallowed by the green, leaving only a few basalt giants to tell the story of who they were and what they dreamed. And so, we leave them there, in the twilight of the Veracruz forests, staring out with their timeless eyes as the stars move slowly across the velvet sky above. When the first of these giants was pulled from the clinging mud of Hueyapan in 1862, it did not emerge as a collection of broken shards, but as a singular, overwhelming presence. The earth seemed to yield a face that was already watching, waiting for the light to touch its features for the first time in millennia. As the workmen cleared the damp soil from the basalt, they found themselves staring into eyes that were wide, heavy-lidded, and strangely tranquil. There is a specific weight to these faces, a physical density that goes beyond the literal tons of volcanic stone. They possess a fleshy realism that feels almost defiant against the passage of time. The noses are carved with a remarkable breadth, the bridges low and strong, leading down to nostrils that seem caught in the mid-breath of a living man. The lips are perhaps the most arresting feature of all, thick, full, and slightly parted, as if the stone were on the verge of exhaling a secret kept since the dawn of the pre-classic period. These are not the stylized, geometric abstractions we often associate with ancient deities. Instead, they feel like portraits. There is a softness to the carving of the cheeks and a subtle tension around the mouth that suggests individual character, a specific human identity frozen in the cooling of volcanic fire. And yet, crowning these faces is something entirely practical, yet deeply mysterious. Each head wears a distinct headgear, a cap that fits snugly over the brow and ears. To the modern eye, they resemble the leather helmets of early 20th century gridiron players or the protective gear of a pugilist. Some are adorned with etched symbols, claws, feathers, or geometric patterns, while others remain starkly functional. These helmets suggest a world of ritualized conflict, or perhaps a high-stakes ballgame, where the stakes were not merely points, but the very movement of the sun and the falling of the rain. They speak of a society that valued the protection of the mind, or perhaps the containment of a power that resided within the skull. When José Melgar, the first scholar to describe the Hueyapan head, stood before it in the 19th century, he was struck by a profound sense of displacement. He looked at the broad features, the specific anatomy of the nose and the lips, and his mind travelled across the vast, dark expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. In his writings, he noted with a sense of conviction that these were not the features he expected to find in the ancient Americas. To Melgar, the stone spoke of Ethiopia. He saw in the basalt the unmistakable physiognomy of Africa, suggesting that long before the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria ever caught the trade winds, there had been a bridge of wooden hulls and daring mariners connecting the two continents. He imagined a forgotten era of trans-oceanic travel, where the currents of the sea acted as a conveyor of culture and blood. It was a theory born of visual shock, a reaction to the sheer otherness of the statues compared to the later Maya or Aztec art that was then becoming known to the outside world. As we contemplate Melgar's interpretation today, we must sit with the mystery of that first impression. While modern archaeology looks to the indigenous populations of the Gulf Coast, noting that these features can still be found in the faces of the people living in the Tabasco and Veracruz lowlands today, the initial African hypothesis lingers in the periphery of our imagination. It reminds us of how little we truly know about the wandering of ancient peoples. We speak of stratigraphy, the study of rock layers to determine the age of artifacts. And we use radiocarbon dating to pin these giants to a timeline between 1200 and 400 years before the Common Era. But numbers and layers of soil cannot fully explain the emotional impact of standing before them. There is a serenity in their expressions that is almost unnerving. They do not scowl, they do not threaten, they simply exist in a state of eternal, meditative observation. The basalt itself tells a story of immense labor and devotion. This stone was not found in the alluvial plains where the heads were eventually discovered. No, the stone came from the Tuxtla Mountains, over 50 miles away. Without the wheel, without beasts of burden, the Olmec moved these boulders, some weighing as much as 40 tons, through swamps, across rivers, and over broken terrain. Why go to such lengths? Why choose this specific, dark, volcanic rock? Perhaps they believed the stone held the spirit of the mountain, or that by carving the likeness of a ruler into the bones of the earth, they were ensuring his immortality. As the sun sets and the shadows lengthen across the forest floor, the contours of the faces seem to shift. The play of light across the broad noses and full lips creates an illusion of movement, as if the giants are slowly waking from a long, stony sleep. We are left to wonder if these were kings, or perhaps fallen warriors, or even the deified ancestors of a clan that has long since vanished into the mists of deep time. The helmets they wear might be badges of office, or they might be the gear of travelers who saw things we can no longer imagine. When we look at the smooth, polished surface of the stone, we are looking at the result of thousands of hours of patient grinding with sand and water. Each curve of the lip, each fold of the eyelid was a deliberate act of memory. The Olmec were not just building monuments, they were defying the silence of the grave. They were insisting that they were here, that they mattered, and that their faces deserved to be carved into the very foundation of the world. And so, the debate between the local legend and the foreign connection continues to simmer in the quiet corners of history. Whether they represent a lost link to a distant continent or the pinnacle of a homegrown civilization, the power they exert over the observer remains unchanged. They are the guardians of a history that was almost lost, standing as silent witnesses to the rise and fall of everything we think we know. As we move deeper into the story of the Olmec, we must carry these faces with us, these broad, calm basalt masks that stare out from the jungle, reminding us that the past is never truly gone. It is merely waiting to be uncovered, one layer of earth at a time. The weight of the stone is the weight of time itself, pressing down on the present, demanding that we remember the names of those who have no one left to speak them. To understand the magnitude of these silent watchers, one must first look toward the horizon, toward the jagged, emerald-shrouded peaks of the Sierra de los Tuxtlas. These mountains rise like ancient sentinels from the coastal plains of Veracruz, their summits often veiled in a thick, humid mist that seems to blur the line between the earth and the heavens. It was here, in the fiery heart of these volcanic highlands, that the story of the colossal heads truly began, not in the soft soil of the river valleys, but in the cooling veins of the earth itself. The stone used to craft these monuments is a dense, dark basalt, a volcanic rock born of subterranean heat and immense pressure, forged in the deep time of the planet's turbulent youth. Geologists have traced the specific chemical signatures of the stone back to the Cerro Xintepec, a prominent dome within the Tuxtla Range. It is a place of profound stillness today, where the only sound is the rustle of tropical birds and the distant drip of mountain rain. Yet 3,000 years ago, it would have been a place of organized, rhythmic industry. We must imagine the Olmec stoneworkers standing before these massive boulders, some weighing as much as 40 tons, seeing not just a rock but a sleeping ancestor waiting to be awakened. To the Olmec, the volcano was likely more than a source of material. It was a sacred navel of the world, a place where the internal fire of the earth met the sky. The basalt was a physical manifestation of that power, a frozen piece of the mountain's own soul, durable enough to withstand the slow erosion of the centuries. The mystery deepens when we consider the logistical nightmare of moving such weight across a landscape that seems designed to resist it. The ritual centers of San Lorenzo and La Venta, where the heads were ultimately placed, lie many miles away from these mountain quarries. In some instances, the stone had to travel over 60 miles through a labyrinth of dense jungle, treacherous swamps, and meandering river systems, and here we encounter one of the most enduring puzzles of Mesoamerican archaeology. For the Olmec possessed no beasts of burden. There were no horses to pull the sledges, no oxen to shoulder the weight, and, perhaps most strikingly, no use of the wheel for transport. In the wet, soft earth of the Gulf Coast, a wheel would have likely been a liability, sinking into the mud under the crushing pressure of the basalt. And so, we are left to contemplate the sheer human will required to bridge that distance. It is a feat that challenges our modern understanding of ancient capabilities, a testament to a society so highly organized and so deeply motivated by spiritual necessity that the impossible became a daily reality. Some researchers suggest that the Olmec waited for the heavy rains of the wet season, using the rising rivers to float the massive stones on great balsa rafts, navigating the winding waterways with a precision that speaks to an intimate knowledge of the land's hydraulic pulse. Others envision thousands of men, their muscles straining in unison, pulling the stones over wooden rollers through the thick undergrowth. A slow, agonizing crawl of inches per day, accompanied by the rhythmic chants of those who kept the pace. As the years passed, this labor became a form of prayer, a physical sacrifice offered to the memory of their rulers or their gods. The distance between the mountain and the city was not just a geographic space, but a symbolic journey, a transition from the wild, untamed energy of the volcano to the ordered, sacred space of the ceremonial plaza. When we touch the surface of a colossal head today, we are touching stone that has traveled further than many people in the ancient world would travel in a lifetime. We are touching the sweat of thousands, the ingenuity of engineers who understood the buoyancy of wood and the friction of earth, and the vision of a people who refused to let the weight of the world keep them from their grandest expressions of art. There is a certain poetry in the choice of basalt. It is a stone that remembers the fire. Unlike the limestone used by later civilizations, which can be carved with relative ease but weathers quickly in the tropical humidity, basalt is stubborn. It resists the chisel. It demands patience. The Olmec did not have metal tools. They used harder stones, like jadeite and hematite, to peck and grind away at the volcanic mass, slowly smoothing the features of the faces until they achieved a skin-like texture. This process could take years for a single monument, a slow meditative dialogue between the carver and the mountain's gift. The spiritual significance of this volcanic stone cannot be overstated. In the Mesoamerican worldview, the earth was a living, breathing entity, and the mountains were the homes of the rain gods and the ancestors. By bringing the mountain stone into the heart of their cities, the Olmec were essentially transplanting the sacred geography of the highlands into their own lowland environment. They were creating a permanent connection to the source of life and fire. As we sit in the quiet of the present, listening to the echoes of this ancient industry, we have to wonder what it felt like to witness the arrival of a new head, to see it emerge from the river or the jungle, draped in vines and covered in the dust of the road, finally taking its place among the others. The Tuxtla Mountains continue to watch over the plains, their volcanic peaks silent for now, but the stones they yielded remain as a bridge across the abyss of time. They remind us that the Olmec were not merely passive observers of their environment, they were masters of it, capable of moving mountains if the spirit demanded it. The lack of the wheel or the horse does not signify a lack of sophistication. Rather, it highlights a different kind of intelligence, one that worked in harmony with the seasons, the rivers, and the collective strength of the community. It is a reminder that human potential is not defined by the tools we possess, but by the depths of the mysteries we are willing to pursue. As we move away from the quarries and follow the imagined path of these great stones toward the coastal plains, the air grows thicker and the shadows of the jungle loom larger. We begin to see how the landscape itself shaped the Olmec mind, a world of constant change where rivers shifted their courses and the earth occasionally trembled with the memory of volcanic fire. In such a world, perhaps the only way to find permanence was to carve it out of the strongest thing they knew, to leave behind a face that would not blink, would not wither, and would not be forgotten, even as the cities that housed them were eventually reclaimed by the green tide of the forest. The journey of the stone was only the beginning, for once it arrived at its destination, the true work of transformation began, turning a mountain boulder into a vessel for the eternal. The weight of the stone is not merely a physical measurement. It is a burden of time, a gravity that pulls at the imagination until we find ourselves standing on the muddy banks of the Coatzacoalcos River 3,000 years ago. To understand the Olmec is to understand the logistics of the impossible. These massive boulders of basalt, some weighing as much as 50 tons, did not originate in the soft alluvial plains of the Gulf Coast. They were born in the fires of the Tuxtla Mountains, nearly 100 miles away from the ceremonial centers where they would eventually rest. In a world without the wheel, without pack animals, and without the hardened steel of later ages, the movement of a single head represents a feat of engineering that rivals the construction of the Great Pyramids. We must imagine the silence of the jungle, broken by the rhythmic thrum of hundreds of feet, the low, guttural groans of timber under immense pressure. One theory suggests the use of massive wooden sledges carved from the hardest tropical hardwoods, resting upon a bed of rollers. Each roller would have been a trunk of mahogany or cedar, stripped of its bark and slicked with river mud or animal fats to reduce the friction that sought to bind the stone to the earth. It is a slow, agonizingly patient process, a dance of inches. As the sledge moves forward, the rollers at the rear are liberated, carried by hand to the front of the line, and laid down once more in an endless cycle of renewal. To move a 50-ton block across the soft, yielding earth of the rainforest required a labor force of staggering proportions. Perhaps 1,000 men or more, all pulling in unison, their breath caught in the humid air, their lives dedicated to the singular purpose of moving the mountain to the city. But the land is a treacherous ally. The Olmec heartland is a labyrinth of swamps, bayous, and shifting shadows, where a heavy stone might easily sink into the mire, lost to the silt of history before its features could even be carved. This has led many to look toward the water, toward the great river that snakes through the landscape like a silver serpent. The Coatzacoalcos River was more than a source of life. It was a highway for the gods. Yet the physics of floating 50 tons of solid basalt presents a riddle that remains largely unsolved. Some researchers envision massive balsa rafts, or perhaps 2 or 3 large dugout canoes lashed together to create a stable platform. Even then, the buoyancy required to keep such a dense mass from slipping into the dark depths is immense. It would have required a sophisticated understanding of displacement and balance, a knowledge of the river's moods that could only be gained through generations of observation. As the seasons turned, the Olmec engineers likely waited for the pulse of the earth, the arrival of the great rains. During the seasonal flooding, the river rises, overflowing its banks and turning the parched lowlands into a vast, shallow sea. This rise in water level would have been a logistical tool, a gift from the heavens that allowed the heavy rafts to bypass the tangled undergrowth of the shore and float deep into the interior. In this way, the flood was not a disaster to be feared, but a window of opportunity. A brief moment when the weight of the stone became manageable, buoyed by the very element that sustained their crops. They were masters of timing, aligning their greatest physical efforts with the natural rhythms of the planet, moving with the water rather than against it. The labor required for such a journey suggests a society of profound organization and shared vision. This was not the work of a few wandering tribes, but the coordinated effort of a civilization that could feed, house, and direct thousands of specialized workers for months at a time. There were the scouts who mapped the terrain, the loggers who cleared the paths, the rope makers who twisted agave fibers into cables thick enough to hold the weight of a mountain, and the overseers who kept the rhythm. It is a testament to a collective will that spans the centuries, a belief so powerful that it compelled a people to drag the very bones of the earth across a landscape designed to stop them. And yet, lingering in the back of the mind is the persistent question of why. Why go to such lengths? Why not carve the heads from the local sandstone or the softer volcanic tuff found closer to home? There is a sacredness in the basalt, a density and a darkness that perhaps the Olmec believed held the spirits of the ancestors more securely than any other material. The basalt was eternal, and to move it was to perform a ritual of transformation. The journey itself may have been as important as the destination, a pilgrimage of stone that sanctified the ground over which it passed. As the stone moved, the people moved with it, their stories and their sweat soaking into the earth, binding the community together through the shared struggle of the impossible. As we look upon these faces today, sitting quietly in the filtered light of museum halls or the damp heat of the jungle, we are seeing the end of a long and arduous road. We see the serenity of the features, the smooth curve of the lips, and the steady gaze of the eyes. But we must also try to see the mud, the ropes, and the thousands of hands that are now dust. We must hear the creak of the timber and the rushing of the river. The engineering of the Olmec was not just a matter of physics and levers, it was an act of faith. It was a declaration that the human spirit, when aligned with the forces of nature, could move the immovable and leave a mark upon the world that even 3,000 years of rain and forest could not wash away. The mystery of the transport remains a quiet whisper in the archaeological record, a puzzle with pieces missing, swallowed by the acidity of the soil and the passage of deep time. We find no written records, no diagrams of the rafts, no discarded sledges. We have only the stones themselves and the silent evidence of the distances they travelled. They sit as heavy reminders that our ancestors possessed a brilliance we are only beginning to decode, a brilliance that did not rely on the machine, but on an intimate, profound connection to the physical world. As the years pass and the forest continues its slow, green march, the journey of the stone remains one of the great, untold epics of the ancient world, a story of gravity, water, and the enduring power of human intent. The scent of damp earth and crushed fern leaves hangs heavy in the humid air of the Coatzacoalcos river basin, a scent that has likely remained unchanged for over 3,000 years. It is here, amidst the winding silver ribbons of water and the dense emerald canopy of the Veracruz lowlands, that we find ourselves standing upon the foundations of the first true city of the Americas. This is San Lorenzo Tenochtitlan, a name given by modern explorers to a place whose original name has been swallowed by the long silence of the centuries. To understand the Olmec, one must first understand the ground beneath their feet. Around 1200 BCE, a time when the Mediterranean was still reeling from the Bronze Age collapse and the great pyramids of Giza were already ancient monuments. A group of visionary architects began a project of such staggering scale that it defies our modern understanding of primitive labor. They did not simply build a city upon the land, They reshaped the land itself. San Lorenzo sits upon a massive man-made plateau, a literal island in the sky rising 50 meters above the surrounding floodplains. To create this elevated sanctuary, the Olmec moved millions of cubic tons of earth and stone, basket by basket, hand by hand. They were not merely seeking safety from the seasonal floods. They were asserting a divine dominion over the natural world, crafting a sacred stage where the heavens and the earth could finally meet. As we walk across this high ground in our mind's eye, the sheer technical mastery of the site begins to reveal itself. Beneath the feet of the commoners and the kings, a hidden network of stone-lined channels hummed with the sound of flowing water. This was an advanced drainage system, a labyrinth of U-shaped basalt blocks, precisely carved and fitted together with lids of flat stone. Some archaeologists believe these were more than just sewers or storm drains. They were part of a sophisticated ritual plumbing system, perhaps used to create artificial springs or sacred pools that reflected the stars above. The sound of water, constant, rhythmic and controlled, would have been the heartbeat of San Lorenzo. It was a symphony of engineering that whispered of a people who had mastered the elements long before the first stone of the Parthenon was ever quarried. The social hierarchy of this early capital was etched into the very layout of the plateau. High atop the central ridges lived the elite, the priest-kings and the master artisans who inhabited palatial structures built of earth and timber, decorated with red hematite and yellow ochre. They looked down upon the lower terraces, where the farmers, the hunters, and the weavers lived in more modest dwellings. Every morning, as the mist began to lift from the river, the smell of wood smoke and roasting maize would drift through the air, mingling with the sharper scents of river fish and tropical fruit. It was a bustling, vibrant world, a place where the rhythmic thud of stone tools and the chatter of merchants created a tapestry of human sound that defied the surrounding wilderness. And then there were the heads. In the central plazas and along the ceremonial pathways of San Lorenzo, the colossal stone portraits stood in silent, watchful rows. We must imagine them as they once were, not as weathered relics buried in the mud, but as vibrant, painted icons of power. Some were arranged in long processions, leading the eye toward the sacred mounds that mimicked the shapes of distant volcanoes. These were not just statues. They were the physical manifestations of the Olmec lineage, the faces of the ancestors staring back at the living. As a commoner walked these paths, they would have felt the weight of those heavy basalt gazes, a reminder that the rulers of San Lorenzo were not merely men, but conduits for the divine. The mystery of these faces remains one of the most debated chapters in human history. When we look closely at the features, the broad noses, the full lips, the steady almond-shaped eyes, we are forced to confront the limits of our own historical narratives. For decades, some have looked at these stones and seen a reflection of Africa, a suggestion that ancient mariners may have crossed the Atlantic long before the Vikings or Columbus. They point to the physiological details as evidence of a forgotten connection between two distant worlds. Mainstream science, however, relies on the evidence of stratigraphy, the study of soil layers, and radiocarbon dating of organic remains found near the statues. These methods suggest a local origin, pointing to the indigenous populations of the Gulf Coast, whose descendants still walk these lands today. Yet the questions do not simply vanish under the weight of carbon-14 data. The Olmec were a people of profound depth, a civilization that appeared seemingly fully formed, with a complex calendar, a system of writing, and a mastery of stone that seems to leap out of the void of prehistory. How did they know how to transport 20-ton blocks of basalt across 60 miles of swamp and jungle? How did they develop the mathematics required to align their city with the movements of the planets? As we linger in the shadows of San Lorenzo, we realize that the African connection or the local legend are perhaps just different ways of trying to name a mystery that is far older and more complex than our modern labels allow. Life in the heartland was a delicate balance between the abundance of the earth and the fury of the spirits. To the Olmec, the world was a living, breathing entity, a place where every river, every mountain, and every stone possessed a soul. Their daily lives were governed by the cycles of the sun and the rising of the maize. They played ritual ball games in sunken courts, the heavy rubber balls echoing like thunder against the stone walls. They traded in precious jade and translucent obsidian, bringing materials from hundreds of miles away to be carved into delicate figurines and lethal blades. The social order was absolute, held together by the gravity of the colossal heads and the terrifying, beautiful rituals performed by the shaman kings. As the centuries passed at San Lorenzo, the city reached its zenith, a shining beacon of culture and power in the dark heart of the jungle. But the forces that built the city were the same forces that would eventually lead to its quiet abandonment. Around 900 BCE, the great plateau began to fall silent. The sophisticated drainage systems clogged with silt, and the vibrant paintings on the palace walls began to flake and fade. In a strange and haunting final act, many of the colossal heads were systematically defaced or buried, some laid in careful rows and covered with earth, as if they were being put to rest. Was this a revolution? A ritual deconsecration? Or a desperate attempt to hide the faces of the gods from an encroaching enemy? The jungle, ever patient, began its slow green march back over the plazas and the mounds. The stone-lined channels were swallowed by roots, and the great man-made island became just another hill in a landscape of many hills. The memory of San Lorenzo drifted into the realm of myth, a ghost city whispered about by the later peoples who stumbled upon its ruins. But the stones remained. Deep beneath the topsoil, the basalt faces waited in the dark. Their eyes closed to the passing of the ages, their secrets held fast in the cold embrace of the earth. They were not forgotten by the land, even if they were forgotten by the world. And as we move forward in our journey, we begin to see that the fall of San Lorenzo was not an end, but a transformation. The spirit of the Olmec was moving, drifting like wood smoke toward a new horizon, toward a place called La Venta, where the mystery would only deepen. The ink on the pages of a book can sometimes carry as much weight as the stone of a monument, and in 1976 a single volume began to ripple through the consciousness of the modern world like a stone dropped into a still, dark pool. This was They Came Before Columbus, the seminal work of Ivan van Sertima, a man who looked at the basalt faces of the Olmec and saw not the echoes of a local lineage, but the unmistakable features of a distant home. Van Sertima did not merely suggest a fleeting visit. He proposed a profound cultural intersection, an ancient bridge built of wood and wind that spanned the vast, churning waters of the Atlantic long before the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria were even a whisper in the minds of shipwrights. As we sit with this idea, we must imagine the world as it was in the 14th century, and perhaps even much earlier, in the era of the Mandinka Empire of West Africa. Van Sertima's hypothesis rests upon the seafaring ambitions of the Mali kings, specifically Mansa Abu Bakr II, who is said to have abdicated his golden throne to lead an expedition of 2,000 ships into the river in the ocean. To the modern mind, the Atlantic is a barrier, a terrifying void of salt and storm, but to those who understood the currents, it was a conveyor belt of destiny. The Canary Current, a cold, powerful stream of water that sweeps down the coast of Africa before turning sharply westward toward the Caribbean, acts as a natural highway. It is a silent force, moving with a steady, rhythmic pulse that can carry a vessel across the many thousands of miles of open water with surprising speed. Van Sertima argued that a Mandinka vessel, caught in this current or intentionally following its flow, would find itself deposited almost inevitably upon the shores of the Gulf of Mexico. One can almost feel the spray of the salt air on the faces of those ancient mariners, the creak of the timber, the endless horizon finally breaking into the lush green fringe of a new world. When these travellers stepped onto the soft mud of the Mexican lowlands, Van Sertima believed they did not arrive as conquerors, but as carriers of a sophisticated culture. He pointed to the Olmec colossal heads as the ultimate evidence of this encounter. He did not see them as mere stylized representations of local lords, but as portraits in stone, tributes to the African dignitaries who had brought with them the secrets of pyramid building, the complexities of the calendar, and the sacred rituals of the heavens. He looked at the broad noses, the full lips, and the specific patterns of the headgear, which he compared to the leather helmets and cloth caps worn by West African warriors and royalty. The technicalities of archaeology often rely on stratigraphy, the careful study of the layers of earth that act as a timeline of human presence. While mainstream science suggests these heads were carved centuries before the peak of the Mali Empire, Van Sertima invited us to look deeper, to consider the possibility of earlier, unrecorded voyages that may have occurred in the dawn of the first millennium. He looked for the similarities in the soul of the art itself. In West African sculpture traditions, there is a profound emphasis on the head as the seat of the spirit, the vessel of wisdom and power. The Olmec, too, seemed obsessed with this singular focus, discarding the body to immortalize the essence of the individual in a massive, singular orb of basalt. There is a quiet, haunting beauty in the comparison of these artistic legacies. In the terracotta figures of the Nok culture of Nigeria, one finds a similar treatment of the eyes and the mouth, a sense of heavy, contemplative presence that seems to mirror the expressions found at La Venta and San Lorenzo. Van Sertima suggested that these were not coincidences of human imagination, but the result of a shared vocabulary of prestige. He saw the Olmecoid features not as a biological anomaly, but as a deliberate tribute to a group of people who had arrived from the East, bringing with them the black gold of their knowledge. As the years passed, his theories sparked a firestorm of debate, yet they remained deeply resonant for those who felt that the history of the Americas had been viewed through a narrow, restrictive lens. He asked us to remember that the ocean was never a wall, but a path. He spoke of the botanical evidence, the presence of the African bottle gourd, and certain varieties of cotton that seemed to have crossed the sea long before the rise of global trade. These silent witnesses, these seeds and fibers, tell a story of movement that the written record often ignores. In the stillness of the jungle, where the humidity clings to the skin like a damp shroud, the colossal heads remain indifferent to our theories. They do not speak of their origins. They do not tell us if they were modeled after a local chieftain whose ancestors had walked the land for 10,000 years, or a traveller who had navigated by the stars from a distant shore. But the hypothesis of the African connection forces us to confront the limits of our own maps, both the maps of the world and the maps of time. It suggests a pre-Columbian world that was vibrant, interconnected, and far more mobile than we often dare to imagine. The Mandinka voyages, if they occurred, would represent one of the greatest feats of human endurance and curiosity in the history of our species. To launch into the unknown, trusting the great river of the sea to lead to a new horizon, requires a courage that is difficult to fathom in our age of satellites and GPS, and if they did arrive, if they stood before the Olmec and shared the stories of the Niger River and the great cities of the Sahel, they would have found a people already deeply attuned to the mysteries of the earth and the sky. Perhaps the truth is not a matter of either or, but a complex tapestry of both. Perhaps the Olmec were a purely indigenous phenomenon that nonetheless felt the ripples of contact from across the water. Or perhaps the heads are a memory of a specific moment, a singular event where two worlds met in the shadow of a volcano, and the stone was carved to ensure that the meeting would never be forgotten, even as the names of the participants faded into the mists of deep time. Van Sertima's work remains a testament to the power of looking at the past with different eyes. He challenged the isolationist view of history, which suggests that civilizations developed in vacuum-sealed bubbles, untouched by the outside world. Instead, he painted a picture of a restless, searching humanity, always pushing at the boundaries of the known. Whether one accepts the Mandinka hypothesis or views it as a poetic misreading of the archaeological record, it undeniably changed the way we perceive the Olmec. It added a layer of global significance to these basalt giants, transforming them from local curiosities into potential symbols of a trans-oceanic brotherhood. As we move through the quiet corridors of history, we find that the evidence is often like the shadows in a forest, shifting, elusive, and dependent on where the light is falling. The radiocarbon dating of the Olmec sites tells us one story, a story of a culture that flourished between 1200 and 400 years before the Common Era. This timeline is the bedrock of our understanding, a firm foundation of charred wood and organic remains that have been measured by the steady decay of atoms. Yet the human spirit often yearns for a story that transcends the mechanical ticking of the carbon clock. We are left to wonder about the things that do not leave a trace in the soil. The songs sung on the decks of reed ships, the exchange of ideas in a language now lost, the awe of seeing a face that looks so different from one's own, yet carries the same unmistakable spark of divinity. The African connection theory, regardless of its standing in the halls of academia, serves as a reminder that our past is a vast, unfinished puzzle. There are pieces still missing, buried beneath the silt of the ocean floor, or hidden in the unexcavated mounds of the Peten. And so, we continue to look into the eyes of the colossal heads. We see the heavy lids, the steady gaze that seems to look through us and into the distance. They have survived the collapse of their cities, the encroachment of the forest, and the scrutiny of the modern world. They remain as they were, silent, heavy, and profound. As the night deepens and the world grows still, we might imagine those ancient travellers standing on the deck of a ship as the sun sets over the Atlantic, watching the stars emerge one by one, guiding them toward a destination they could not yet name, but which would one day carve their likeness into the very bones of the earth. Deep within the cool, damp layers of the earth, where the moisture of the Gulf Coast seeps into the soil, lies a different kind of record, one that does not rely on the interpretation of stone lips or the curve of a basalt brow, while the colossal heads stand as a testament to the artistic vision of a lost age. The bones of those who lived beneath their shadow tell a story written in the very blueprint of life itself. We must look closer now, past the monumental and into the microscopic, where the dust of the ancestors holds the secrets of their origin. In the quiet laboratories of the modern world, scientists have turned their gaze toward mitochondrial DNA, that tiny, inherited thread that connects us to our mothers and their mothers, stretching back through the centuries like a silver cord across a darkened room. When researchers carefully extract these fragments from the remains found in Olmec-era burials, they are searching for a signature, a genetic fingerprint that might confirm a journey across the vast, churning waters of the Atlantic. They look for the markers common to the peoples of West Africa, those distinct sequences that would serve as a bridge between two distant continents. And yet, as the data emerges from the silence of the past, the results speak of a different journey, a much older one. The genetic profiles recovered from these ancient sites
reveal a deep and abiding connection to the indigenous lineages of the Americas. The markers found are those of the ancestors who crossed the land bridge from the north, thousands of years before the first stone was ever quarried from the Tuxtla Mountains. There is a profound stillness in this realization, a sense that the people who built the great mounds of Venta and San Lorenzo were exactly who they appeared to be, a civilization born of the soil they walked upon, evolving in rhythm with the seasons of their own land. As we ponder these findings, we might consider the work of the biological anthropologists who spend their lives studying craniometry, the detailed measurement of the human skull. It is a field that requires a patient, steady hand and a mind open to the subtle variations of the human form. For many years, some pointed to the broad features of the colossal heads as evidence of an outside influence, but when the actual skeletal remains of the Olmec people are examined, a more nuanced picture begins to form. The variation in their features, the height of a cheekbone, the width of a nasal bridge, falls consistently within the range of the diverse indigenous populations of Mesoamerica. The human face is a canvas of incredible variety, and within any single population, there are echoes of many different forms. The biological consensus suggests that the African appearance some perceive in the stone heads is perhaps a reflection of our own desire to find connections where none may exist, or perhaps it is a tribute to a specific physical type that the Olmecs themselves found powerful or sacred. When we look at the descendants of these people today, living in the small villages of Veracruz and Tabasco, we see those same broad faces, those same strong features reflected in the eyes of the living. It is a lineage that has never truly left. It has simply shifted from the monumental to the mundane, carried forward in the breath and blood of the people. There is a certain weight to this evidence, a gravity that anchors the Olmec to their own geography. And yet, the mystery does not entirely vanish. Science provides us with the what and the where, but the why remains elusive, drifting just out of reach like mist over a jungle river. Why did they choose to emphasize those specific features? Why did they carve faces that seemed to challenge the expectations of those who would find them thousands of years later? Perhaps the answer lies not in their DNA, but in their dreams, in the way they perceived the world around them, and the gods they believed walked among them. As the years pass and our technology grows more refined, we may find even smaller clues hidden in the stratigraphy, the layers of time that build up like the pages of a book.
Radiocarbon dating tells us when they lived, and genetic analysis tells us who they were related to, but the spirit of a civilization is harder to pin down. It exists in the space between the facts, in the silence of a tomb and the steady gaze of a basalt giant. We are left to wonder if we are asking the right questions, or if we are merely looking for ourselves in the mirror of the past. Imagine for a moment the long nights in the Olmec heartland 3,000 years ago. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming night flowers. The people who lived here did not see themselves as a mystery to be solved. They were a living, breathing culture, navigating the complexities of their own time. They looked at the stars and saw the same constellations we see tonight, though they gave them different names and told different stories about their origin. To them, the colossal heads were not anomalies. They were anchors of their identity, symbols of a power that connected the earth to the sky. The lack of African genetic markers in these pre-Columbian burials does not diminish the majesty of the Olmec achievement. If anything, it makes it more remarkable, a testament to the creative fire that can ignite in any corner of the globe, independent of outside influence. It speaks to the capacity of the human spirit to envision greatness and to manifest it through sheer will and the strength of 1,000 hands. The story of the Olmec is a story of local genius, of a people who looked at the raw materials of their world and saw the potential for something eternal. And so, We sit with the evidence, letting it settle like silt at the bottom of a quiet pool. The DNA, the bones, the measurements, they all point toward a homegrown legacy, a civilization that rose from the swamps and forests of Mexico by its own hand. But even as the scientific consensus solidifies, the heads remain, their expressions unreadable, their origins still debated in the quiet corners of our imagination. They remind us that the past is a vast and layered place, and that for every answer we find, a dozen more questions emerge from the shadows. We might feel a sense of peace in this clarity, a feeling that the pieces of the puzzle are finally beginning to fit together. The Olmec were the pioneers of their world, the mother culture that set the stage for the Maya and the Aztecs who would follow. Their blood still flows, their stones still stand, and their story continues to unfold in the quiet light of discovery. As the night stretches on, we can almost hear the soft footfalls of those ancient people moving through the trees, tending to their fires, and leaving behind a legacy that even time cannot fully erase. In the end, the search for an African connection may tell us more about our own modern world, our desire for a globalized past, our fascination with trans-oceanic voyages, and our need to connect the dots across the map of history. But the earth itself holds a simpler, perhaps more profound truth. It tells us that this land has always been home to creators, to thinkers, and to builders who did not need a map from another world to find their way. They were already there, watching the sun rise over the gulf, carving their history into the bones of the earth, and waiting for us to finally see them for who they truly were. Imagine for a moment the sound of a heavy mallet striking a stone chisel, a rhythmic, steady heartbeat echoing through the humid canopy of the ancient Veracruz jungle. Each strike is deliberate, removing only a tiny flake of dark basalt, slowly coaxing a human face out of a mountain. These were not generic faces, not the idealized, empty masks of a distant god, but the specific, heavy-lidded eyes and firm lips of men who once breathed this thick air. As we look closer at these silent giants, we begin to realize that we are not looking at myths, but at memories. We are looking at the first true portraits of the Americas. The theory that each colossal head represents a specific individual ruler has gained significant ground among those who spend their lives whispering to the stones. While early explorers might have seen only a repetitive pattern of stone sentinels, modern eyes notice the subtle, intentional differences that make each head a unique biography. One face might bear a slight downturn at the corners of the mouth, suggesting a temperament of stern gravity, while another possesses a certain softness in the cheek, perhaps a hint of a ruler who governed during a time of uncharacteristic peace. These are not the mass-produced icons of a nameless faith. They are the living records of a dynasty. Each head is crowned with a helmet, a heavy stone cap that serves as a canvas within a canvas. If you trace the carvings on these helmets with your mind's eye, you find a language of symbols that likely acted as a name or a title. One helmet might be adorned with the talons of a bird of prey, another with the shimmering skin of a serpent or the geometric patterns of a woven reed mat. In the world of the Olmec, these were more than just decorations. They were heraldry. They told the observer exactly who this man was, which lineage he claimed, and what specific power he wielded over the earth and the spirits that dwelled beneath it. And so, we encounter the concept of the divine king, a figure who stood at the bridge between the mundane world of corn and rain and the shimmering, terrifying realm of the supernatural. In the Mesoamerican mind, the ruler was not merely a political leader or a military commander. He was the axis mundi, the center of the world. He was the one who ensured that the sun would continue its journey and that the rains would fall at the proper time to soak the thirsty soil. To look upon the face of such a man was to look upon the physical manifestation of the cosmic order. When a ruler died, his power did not simply vanish into the jungle mist. It had to be anchored, tethered to the earth, so that his successors could draw upon it. This is where the heads may have played their most vital role in the long, slow march of history. Archaeologists have noted that many of these heads were moved, buried, or even recarved from existing stone thrones. This suggests a deeply complex relationship with the past. By carving the likeness of a deceased king and placing it in a public plaza, the new ruler was not just honoring an ancestor. He was legitimizing his own right to lead. He was saying to the people and to the gods that the bloodline remained unbroken. The presence of the ancestor, rendered in indestructible stone, provided a silent but absolute endorsement of the current regime. Imagine walking through the great plaza of Venta 3,000 years ago. The air is thick with the scent of copal incense and the sound of distant flutes. You pass by these enormous, silent faces, each one larger than a man, each one staring out with a gaze that seems to pierce through time itself. You would feel small, not just because of their physical size, but because of the weight of the history they represented. You are standing in the presence of the Ajor, the Lord, the one who speaks. The heads served as a permanent audience, a council of stone kings who watched over the markets, the ceremonies, and the daily lives of their subjects long after their physical bodies had returned to the clay. As the centuries passed, the tradition of these portraits became a cornerstone of Mesoamerican power. The idea that a ruler's identity could be captured and preserved became a template for the Maya, the Zapotec, and the Aztecs who would follow in the footsteps of the Olmec. But there is something uniquely haunting about these first attempts. There is a raw, heavy realism in the Olmec heads that was often lost in the more stylized and ornate art of later civilizations. These are faces of flesh and bone, of muscle and skin, captured in the unforgiving medium of volcanic rock. We must wonder about the artists who carved them, the nameless masters who spent years of their lives shaping these monuments. Did they work from memory, or did the ruler sit before them, his features illuminated by torchlight as the sculptor studied the curve of his brow? There is a profound intimacy in these carvings, a sense that the artist knew the subject deeply. Perhaps they were not just carving a king, but a god in the making, a man who was transitioning from the fleeting world of the living into the eternal world of the ancestors. The use of basalt, a stone born from the fire of volcanoes, adds another layer to this mystery. By choosing a material that originated in the depths of the earth, the Olmec were perhaps linking their rulers to the very bones of the world. To carve a king's face into basalt was to ensure that his power would remain as long as the mountains themselves. It was an act of defiance against the passage of time, a way to make the temporary permanent. Meanwhile, the placement of these heads in specific alignments suggests that they were part of a larger, sacred landscape. They were not scattered at random. They were positioned to mark the boundaries of sacred space, to line the paths of processions, and to face the rising stars. Each head was a node in a vast network of power that spanned the Olmec heartland. When a new king took the throne, he did not just inherit a city. He inherited this landscape of stone ghosts, each one a reminder of the responsibilities and the divine nature of his office. As we linger in the presence of these portraits, we are reminded that history is not just a collection of dates and events. It is a story of individuals, of men who had names, who felt the heat of the sun, and who sought to leave a mark that would endure for 3 millennia. They were the architects of the first great civilization of the West, and they chose to be remembered not through golden trinkets or fragile scrolls, but through the sheer, overwhelming presence of their own likenesses. The jungle has tried to reclaim them, covering them in moss and burying them under layers of silt and leaf litter, but the stone remains. It waits patiently in the shadows, holding the secrets of the dynastic successions that once governed this land. And as we brush away the dirt of the ages, we find ourselves looking back into the eyes of the rulers of the jungle, men who understood that power is fleeting, but a portrait in stone can whisper to the future forever. The silent dialogue between the past and the present continues, as each head stands as a testament to the human desire to be seen, to be known, and to never be forgotten. If you were to run your fingers across the cool, dark surface of a colossal head, you would feel more than just the smooth grain of volcanic basalt. Beneath the moss and the tropical humidity, the stone bears scars that were not put there by the slow erosion of time or the creeping roots of the jungle. You would feel shallow pits, rhythmic indentations, and deep, deliberate grooves that cut across the brow or the cheek of the basalt lord. These are the marks of a ritualized violence, a sacred defacement that speaks to a profound understanding of the cycle of life and death. To the Olmec, a monument was not a static object to be preserved in a museum for eternity. It was a living entity, possessed of a spirit that could be summoned, honored, and eventually released. Archaeologists have long puzzled over these pockmarks and ground-down surfaces, wondering if they represented the anger of a conquered people or the desecration of a fallen dynasty. But as we look closer at the stratigraphy, that layering of earth that acts as the world's memory, a different story begins to emerge. The damage appears controlled, almost surgical. It suggests that when a ruler died, or perhaps when a specific 52-year calendar cycle drew to its close, the head was not simply abandoned, it was ritually killed. By grinding into the stone, the Olmec may have been harvesting the power of the image, taking the stone dust to be used in other ceremonies. Or perhaps they were blinding the monument to ensure its spirit would not wander the earth once its earthly purpose was fulfilled. It is a quiet, rhythmic destruction, a way of acknowledging that all things, even those carved from the bones of the earth, must eventually return to the silence. This concept of ritual recycling goes even deeper into the heart of the basalt. We find evidence that these massive heads were sometimes not the final form of the stone, but merely a middle stage in a long spiritual journey. Many of the large rectangular altars found at sites like San Lorenzo bear the telltale signs of having once been colossal heads themselves. Imagine the immense effort required to haul a 20-ton block from the Tuxtla Mountains, only to carve it into a face, then later to recarve that face into a throne or an altar. This was not a matter of convenience or a lack of materials. It was a deliberate choice to carry the history of the stone forward. The essence of the ancestor remained trapped within the new shape, a lineage of power that flowed from one form to another, never truly dying, only changing. As the years passed and the great cities began to fade into the green embrace of the lowlands, many of these heads were carefully, almost tenderly, buried. They were not cast aside in the mud, but placed in specific alignments, often on layers of colored sand or surrounded by offerings of jade and pottery. This burial suggests a belief in a spiritual rebirth, a planting of the stone back into the earth like a seed. To the Olmec mind, the earth was a hungry, living thing, a source of all life and the final destination for all souls. By returning the image of the ruler to the ground, they were perhaps ensuring the continued fertility of the land, or perhaps they were hiding their gods from the eyes of a changing world, tucking them away in a long stone sleep that would last for 3,000 years. In this world of deep time, the distinction between the living and the dead becomes blurred. The basalt was not seen as inert matter, but as a condensed form of the earth's own vital energy. When a head was pitted or ground, it was a conversation between the community and the divine. We might see it as damage, but they may have seen it as a liberation. The spirit of the ruler, once tethered to the stone, was allowed to pass through the veil, leaving behind only the shell for the jungle to reclaim. It is a humbling thought to realize that what we admire today as masterpieces of ancient art were, to their creators, temporary vessels for a power far greater than the stone itself. Meanwhile, the mystery of the African connection lingers in the shadows of these ritual acts. If these faces truly represented a distant lineage, the act of burying them takes on an even more poignant meaning. Were they preserving the memory of a voyage from across the Atlantic, or were they grounding a local legend so deeply into the soil that it could never be uprooted? The evidence of the stone tells us of a people obsessed with the passage of time and the weight of legacy. They understood that to live forever, one must be willing to change, to be broken down, and to be reborn in a different light. As we stand before these silent giants, we are reminded that we are only the latest in a long line of observers, catching a fleeting glimpse of a cycle that began long before our history was written and will continue long after our own monuments have crumbled into the dust. The Olmec concept of the soul was likely tied to the breath, a flickering flame that required constant nourishment through ritual. When the heads were placed in their earthen tombs, they were often oriented toward the cardinal directions or toward sacred mountains, creating a map of the cosmos that existed beneath the feet of the living. This hidden geography suggests that the Olmec lived in two worlds at once, the sun-drenched plazas of their cities and the dark, cool interior of the earth where the ancestors resided. The burial of the heads was a bridge between these realms, a way of ensuring that the wisdom of the past continued to nourish the roots of the present. As we contemplate the intentional scars on these faces, the pitting that marks so many of the foreheads and cheeks, we might think of it as a form of sacred braille, a language of touch that connected the hands of the priest to the spirit of the king. Each indentation was a prayer, a request, or a mark of closure. There is a profound patience in this work, the slow, steady grinding of stone against stone, the sound echoing through the humid air of the river basin. It was a labor of devotion that recognized the limits of human life. A man might rule for 30 years, but the stone would endure for 30 centuries, provided it was treated with the proper reverence. And so, the heads remain, some scarred, some recycled, some buried deep beneath the silt of ancient floods. They are the anchors of a lost civilization, holding fast against the currents of time. They teach us that nothing is ever truly forgotten as long as it is committed to the earth. The cycle of ritual defacement and burial was not an end, but a transition, a way of folding the past into the present so that the future might have a foundation upon which to build. In the quiet of the jungle, where the air is heavy with the scent of damp earth and blooming orchids, the heads continue their long vigil, dreaming of the days when they were the vibrant centers of a world that understood the beauty of the beginning, the necessity of the end, and the eternal promise of the return. As the shadows lengthen across the modern excavations, we are left to wonder about the secrets that still remain beneath the surface. For every head we have found, how many more lie hidden in the deep clay, waiting for their turn to be breathed back into the light? The story of the Olmec is a story of layers, of stone, of earth, and of meaning, each one waiting to be peeled back by those who are willing to listen to the whispers of the basalt. The journey into the past is never a straight line. It is a circle, much like the calendar cycles that govern the lives of these ancient people, returning always to the same fundamental questions of who we are and where we came from, etched forever in the stoic, weathered faces of the kings of the dawn. The scent of brackish water and damp ferns hangs heavy in the air, a thick, humid veil that has shielded the secrets of the earth for more than 2 millennia. As the once vibrant center of San Lorenzo began to fade, its power ebbing away like a retreating tide, the heart of the Olmec world migrated toward the east, seeking refuge in a place that seemed protected by the very elements themselves. This was Venta, a solitary island of dry ground rising defiantly from the middle of a vast, treacherous mangrove swamp near the coast of the Gulf of Mexico. It was a landscape of mirrors, where the sky reflected in the still, dark waters of the marshes, and where the boundaries between the earth and the heavens felt thin, almost permeable. Here, amidst the tangled roots and the rhythmic chorus of cicadas, a new chapter of human ambition began to unfold, one that would leave behind some of the most enigmatic structures in the history of the Americas. At the center of this island sanctuary stands a monument that defies the flat horizon of the coastal plains, the Great Pyramid. Even now, softened by time and overgrown with the persistent green of the jungle, its bulk is unmistakable. It rises over 100 feet into the air, a massive mound of earth and clay that was once finished with a smooth, sloping surface. Archaeologists, through the careful study of stratigraphy, that is, the reading of the Earth's history through its layers of soil, have marveled at the sheer volume of material moved by human hands to create this mountain in the marsh. But it is not merely the size of the pyramid that evokes a sense of wonder, it is its orientation. The entire ceremonial precinct of Venta is laid out with a precise, intentional alignment, skewed 8 degrees west of true north. This was no accident of construction. It was a deliberate reaching out to the cosmos, a way of tethering the city to the stars that wheeled overhead. Some suggest it pointed toward the pole star of that ancient era, while others see in its shadow the movements of a celestial clock we have long since forgotten how to read. As one walks the sacred axis of the site, there is a feeling of walking through a dream made of stone and soil. The Olmec at Venta were masters of the hidden, of the beauty that lies beneath the surface. Deep within the earth, they buried treasures that were never meant to be seen by human eyes again once the rituals were complete. These are the massive offerings, pits dug deep into the clay and filled with hundreds of tons of polished greenstone and serpentine blocks. In one instance, they created a magnificent mosaic pavement, an abstract design of olive-colored stone tiles arranged in a pattern that some believe represents a stylized jaguar mask, or perhaps a map of the cosmos itself. Once the mosaic was finished, it was immediately covered with layers of colored clay and buried, a silent gift to the spirits of the underworld. It is a profound mystery to consider. A culture that expended such immense labor to create something beautiful, only to surrender it back to the darkness of the earth as a permanent prayer. The weight of this devotion is felt most strongly when one encounters the sentinels of the precinct, the 4 colossal heads that stand guard over the northern end of the ceremonial site. Carved from the same dark volcanic basalt as their predecessors at San Lorenzo, these massive portraits were transported over 50 miles through the swamps and rivers, a feat of engineering that remains almost incomprehensible. How did they move these stones, weighing many tons, through a landscape where a single misstep could see a monument swallowed by the mud? Perhaps they waited for the seasonal floods, floating the great stones on massive rafts made of cedar logs, guided by the steady hands of sailors who knew the moods of the river. When they finally arrived at the island of Venta, they were shaped into the likenesses of men who seemed to bridge the gap between the human and the divine. These 4 heads, known to researchers simply by their numbers, possess a presence that is both grounding and unsettling. They do not look at one another. Instead, they face outward, their gazes fixed on the horizons, as if watching for the return of a distant memory. Their features are carved with a startling realism. The fleshy folds of the cheeks, the slight part of the lips, and those deep, searching eyes that seem to follow the observer through the shadows of the trees. Each wears a unique headgear, a helmet or a cap decorated with symbols of authority, claws, feathers, and geometric patterns that likely spoke volumes to the people of the time, though their specific meanings have been eroded by the passage of centuries. Some see in these faces the undeniable traits of travelers from across the great oceans, while others see the proud, indigenous features of the lords of the swamp, immortalized at the height of their power. The mystery of Venta is deepened by the realization that this was not merely a city, but a stage for the performance of the sacred. Between the colossal heads and the Great Pyramid lie the remains of basalt column enclosures, strange structures made of natural volcanic pillars that look like petrified forests. It is here that the Olmec elite were laid to rest in tombs of stone, surrounded by jade figurines and shimmering mirrors made of polished magnetite. These mirrors, ground to a perfect concavity, are a testament to a sophisticated understanding of optics. They could reflect the sun's rays to start fires or perhaps project images onto the mist of a darkened chamber, turning the priest-kings into beings of pure light. As the damp heat of the afternoon settles over the ruins, it is easy to imagine the flicker of torchlight against the polished jade, the low hum of chanting echoing off the basalt walls, and the stoic faces of the colossal heads standing as silent witnesses to rituals that sought to maintain the balance of the world. In the quiet of the swamp, the passage of deep time feels tangible. We look at the ruins of Venta and see a civilization that flourished for centuries, a place where art and science and spirit were woven into a single, seamless tapestry. We see the beginnings of the complex calendars that would later define the Maya and the origins of a writing system that is only just beginning to yield its secrets to modern scholars. Yet for all we have uncovered, through radiocarbon dating and careful excavation, the essence of the Olmec remains elusive, a whisper in the wind that stirs the palm fronds. The colossal heads of Venta remain the ultimate guardians of this silence. They are the anchors of history, rooted in the muck of the island, reminding us that even the greatest of empires is eventually reclaimed by the earth, leaving behind only the stone and the stars to tell the story of who they were. If you were to stand upon the high, pine-scented ridges of the Valley of Mexico 3,000 years ago, looking down toward the shimmering lakes that would one day cradle the Aztec capital, you might feel a strange sense of familiarity. The air is thinner here, miles away from the humid, salt-sprayed swamps of the Gulf Coast, yet the symbols carved into the pottery and the jade ornaments tell a story of a distant influence. It is as if a single heartbeat, originating in the jungles of San Lorenzo, had begun to pulse through the very veins of the continent. Archaeologists call this phenomenon the Olmec horizon, a period where the distinctive aesthetic of the rubber people seemed to ripple outward, touching the high valleys and the rugged mountains of Guerrero. It is a time when the world of Mesoamerica began to speak a common visual language. We see it in the downturned mouths of ceramic figurines found far from the Olmec heartland, and in the strange, slanted eyes of hollow baby sculptures unearthed in graves hundreds of miles from the nearest basalt quarry. This spread of ideas was not a sudden flood, but a slow, rhythmic expansion, a cultural diffusion that suggests the Olmec were not merely an isolated tribe, but the architects of a vast, invisible web. For decades, this observation has fueled one of the most spirited debates in the study of ancient America. On one side, scholars speak of the Olmec as the Mother Culture, the singular wellspring from which all subsequent civilizations, like the Maya and the Zapotec, drew their sustenance. In this view, the Olmec were the great teachers, the pioneers of writing, the calendar, and the complex social hierarchies that would define the region for millennia. They were the sun, and all other cultures were planets caught in their gravitational pull. But as more excavations have taken place in the highlands, a different perspective has emerged, the idea of sister cultures. This theory suggests that the Olmec were not alone in their sophistication. Instead, they were part of a peer polity network, a group of contemporary societies that were all evolving at the same time, trading ideas and technologies like neighbors sharing a fence. In this light, the Olmec were perhaps the most visually dominant, but they were part of a larger, collective awakening. It is a subtle distinction, yet it changes how we perceive the flow of history, whether it was a gift given by one or a fire stoked by many. This connection was forged not just through ideas, but through the tangible reality of trade. Imagine a line of porters, their backs bowed under the weight of heavy packs, navigating the narrow mountain passes and the treacherous riverbanks. They carried the treasures of the earth. From the volcanic regions they brought obsidian, the black volcanic glass that could be flaked into blades sharper than any steel. From the tropical lowlands they carried precious cacao, the bitter beans that would eventually become the drink of gods and kings. And most mysterious of all, they traded magnetite, a heavy, dark ore that the Olmec polished into concave mirrors. When we look at these mirrors today, we see more than just a reflection. We see a mastery of physics that feels out of place in such a distant age. Some believe these mirrors were used to start fires, focusing the sun's rays into a single scorching point. Others suggest they were worn on the chest of shamans, acting as portals to another dimension, or perhaps as tools for divination, allowing the wearer to peer into the murky depths of the future. The presence of these objects in distant burial sites tells us that the Olmec trade networks were the lifelines of the ancient world, connecting the obsidian mines of the highlands to the jade workshops of the coast. As these goods travelled, so did the gods. The iconography of the Olmec began to appear in places where the air was too cold for the jaguar and too dry for the caiman. Yet, there they are, carved into the rock faces of Chalcatzingo, far to the west. We see the recurring motif of the feathered serpent, a creature that bridges the gap between the earth and the sky, the crawling and the soaring. This serpent would go on to haunt the dreams of Mesoamerica for 2,000 years, eventually becoming the great Quetzalcoatl of the Aztecs. And then there is the jaguar, the silent stalker of the jungle floor. To the Olmec, the jaguar was not just an animal, but a symbol of the night, of the underworld, and of the transformative power of the shaman. In the Olmec horizon, we see the emergence of the were-jaguar, a haunting figure that is part human and part feline, with a cleft head and a snarling lip. It is a representation of a soul in flux, caught between two worlds. When we find these images in the Valley of Mexico or the mountains of Guerrero, we are seeing the spread of a religion that prioritized the mysterious and the primal. The movement of these motifs suggests a shared understanding of the universe, a cosmology that was being written in stone and clay across a vast landscape. It was a world where the mountains were seen as the homes of the ancestors, and the caves were the mouths of the earth. The Olmec may have been the first to formalize these beliefs, but the echoes we find in distant valleys suggest that the entire region was vibrating at the same frequency. As the centuries drifted by, the Olmec influence seemed to permeate every aspect of life. Even the way people organized their villages began to mirror the grand plazas of San Lorenzo and Venta. The concept of the ceremonial center, a sacred space set apart from the mundane world, took root in the consciousness of the people. They began to build mounds and platforms, reaching toward the stars in an attempt to replicate the celestial order on the ground. It is a quiet, persistent legacy, one that doesn't always require a colossal head to make its presence known. We must wonder what it was like for a traveller from the highlands to arrive at the great city of Venta for the first time. After weeks of trekking through the dust and the heat, they would find themselves in a place of emerald green, where the earth was shaped into artificial mountains, and the air hummed with the sound of thousands of voices. They would see the great stone heads, staring with their unblinking gaze, and they would see the jade offerings buried deep within the clay. They would return to their own people changed, carrying not just obsidian or magnetite, but stories of a place where the gods walked among men. This exchange was the true foundation of Mesoamerican civilization. It was a dialogue that lasted for hundreds of years, a conversation between different landscapes and different peoples that eventually coalesced into a unified tradition. Whether the Olmec were the mother or the sister, their role as the great catalysts of history is undeniable. They provided the alphabet for a story that was just beginning to be told, and yet, for all the trade and all the shared symbols, there remains a sense of isolation in each of these ancient pockets. The distances were vast, and the terrain was unforgiving. Each valley developed its own dialect of the Olmec style, a local legend woven into the overarching narrative. In Guerrero, the stone carvings are more angular, more abstract. In the Valley of Mexico, the pottery is more delicate. It is as if the Olmec influence was a light filtered through many different colored lenses, each one casting a unique shadow on the ground. As we contemplate this horizon, this expansion of the Olmec spirit, we are reminded of the limits of our own understanding. We see the artifacts and we map the trade routes, but the true nature of the connection remains a mystery. Was it an empire of the sword or an empire of the mind? Did the Olmec send out missionaries to spread their faith? Or did their neighbors simply look toward the coast and see a way of life that they wished to emulate? The stone does not answer. It only sits in the quiet of the museum or the darkness of the earth, holding on to the secrets of a time when the world was much larger than it is today, and the stars were the only map anyone ever needed. The scent of damp earth and crushed marigolds often lingers in the air of the Mexican lowlands, a reminder that in this part of the world, the veil between the human and the animal has always been paper thin. When we gaze upon the colossal heads, we see faces that appear strikingly human, yet there is a subtle, haunting geometry to their features that suggests something more ancient and predatory. To understand the Olmec is to understand the Jaguar, the silent shadow of the jungle, the golden-eyed master of the night, who moves between the roots of the world and the canopy of the stars. In the quiet halls of our modern understanding, we often struggle to reconcile the biological with the spiritual. But for the Olmec, these two realms were never truly separate. As we observe the wide, flat noses and the thick, downturned lips of the stone monuments, we are witnessing more than just a portrait of a ruler. We are seeing the physical manifestation of the were-jaguar, a being caught in the very moment of transformation. In Olmec art, the human form is frequently seen melting into the feline. This process of becoming is not a descent into savagery, but an ascent into power. The shaman kings of San Lorenzo and La Venta did not merely rule over men, they were believed to possess the ability to shed their skin and adopt the spirit of the great cat. This belief system, often referred to as Nagualism, suggests that every person has an animal counterpart, a soul twin that shares their fate, and for the elite, that twin was always the jaguar. Modern observers often point to the heavy, flattened noses of the colossal heads as evidence of trans-oceanic travelers. Yet within the context of Olmec aesthetics, these features serve a deeply symbolic purpose. When a jaguar snarls, its snout flattens and its nostrils flare, creating a rhythmic, powerful distortion of the face. By stylizing the features of their leaders to mimic this feline morphology, the Olmec sculptors were carving the divine right of kings into the very basalt. They were creating a visual language where a flat nose was not a sign of ethnicity, but a sign of the sacred, a bridge between the breath of a man and the roar of a god. The lips, often depicted with a distinctive trapezoidal shape, mirror the V-shaped cleft found in the skulls of many Olmec figures, a symbolic opening in the head that allowed the spirit to travel freely between dimensions. This journey between worlds was not a metaphorical one for the Olmec. It was a lived reality, facilitated by the deep, rhythmic knowledge of the natural world and the use of potent substances harvested from the earth. Deep within the tropical forests, they discovered the secrets of the bufo marinus toad and various species of morning glory seeds, natural keys that unlock the doors of perception. We call these substances hallucinogens, but to the Olmec they were teonanacatl, or the flesh of the gods. Under the guidance of a master practitioner, the shaman would enter a state of deep trance, a sensory dissolution where the boundaries of the self began to fray and tear. In the flickering light of a torch within a dark cavern, the shaman would feel his muscles ripple with a strength not his own. His vision would sharpen in the darkness, and his voice would drop into a low, guttural vibration. Imagine the scene in a central plaza 3,000 years ago. The air is thick with the smoke of copal resin, a sweet, heavy incense that clings to the lungs. The drums beat with a steady, heart-like thrum, and the gathered crowd watches as their leader emerges from the shadows of a temple. He is draped in the pelt of a jaguar, the spots dancing in the torchlight like distant galaxies. To the onlookers, he is no longer the man they knew. His face, perhaps painted or masked to emphasize those wide, feline features, becomes a mirror of the colossal stone heads that stand guard around the ceremonial center. In this moment of ritual ecstasy, the stone and the flesh are one. The ruler has become the ancestor, the man has become the cat, and the community is bound together by the shared experience of the impossible. This aesthetic of the jaguar permeates every level of Olmec life, from the smallest jade figurine to the largest monolith. It is a philosophy of fluid identity. While we in the modern West tend to view the world through rigid categories, man or animal, life or death, spirit or matter, the Olmec saw a universe of constant flux. They understood that the soul is a traveller, and that the body is merely a vessel that can be reshaped by will and ritual. The stylized features of the colossal heads are a testament to this ancient psychology. They are portraits of people who had seen the other side, who had walked through the forest on 4 paws and looked at the moon through golden eyes. As the centuries passed and the Olmec civilization began to fade into the green embrace of the jungle, this jaguar cult did not vanish. It flowed outward, like a river changing its course, influencing the Maya, the Zapotec, and eventually the Aztecs. The image of the feline man remained a potent symbol of authority and spiritual depth across Mesoamerica for millennia. Even today, in the remote villages of Guerrero and Veracruz, there are dances where men dress in spotted skins and fight with whips that sound like thunder, a distant, echoing memory of the where jaguars reign. We must ask ourselves if our search for the origins of the Olmec has sometimes blinded us to the profound internal logic of their culture. When we look for evidence of distant lands in the shape of a stone nose, do we miss the spiritual map the Olmec were trying to leave behind? They were a people obsessed with the threshold, the place where the water meets the land, where the day meets the night, and where the human meets the divine. The colossal heads are not just monuments to individuals, they are anchors for the soul, heavy enough to withstand the passage of deep time and the erosion of memory. The basalt used for these heads was often transported from the Tuxtla Mountains, a journey of over 60 miles through swamps and rivers. Why go to such immense lengths, if not to capture something that was essential to their survival? The stone itself was a living thing, born from the fire of volcanoes and cooled by the breath of the earth. By carving their leaders into this volcanic heart, the Olmec were ensuring that the power of the jaguar would endure long after the flesh had returned to the dust. They were creating a lineage of stone, a silent dynasty that continues to watch us with an expression of patient, feline indifference. In the quiet of the night, when the sounds of the modern world fall away, it is easy to imagine the Olmec shamans still moving through the shadows of the forest. They are the keepers of a knowledge that we have largely forgotten, a way of being that does not fear the dark or the transformation it brings. They remind us that we are not separate from the world around us, but are part of a vast, breathing tapestry of life. The aesthetics of the Jaguar are a call to remember our own wildness, to recognize the animal that still stirs within us when the moon is full and the wind sighs through the trees. As we move forward in our journey through the mysteries of the Olmec, we must carry this feline spirit with us. We must learn to look at the evidence not just with the eyes of a scientist, but with the heart of a seeker. The secrets of the colossal heads are not hidden in the stone alone, but in the relationship between the stone, the carver, and the spirit that moved them both. The Jaguar is still there, crouched in the tall grass of history, waiting for us to see the world as it once was, a place of magic, of terror, and of infinite possibility. And so, we continue to walk the path they laid down, through the mud and the mist, guided by the steady gaze of the stone giants who refuse to be forgotten. The scent of damp earth and rotting vegetation hangs heavy in the air, a constant reminder that in the lowlands of the Gulf Coast, the jungle is always waiting to reclaim what was borrowed from it. By the year 400 before the Common Era, the great ceremonial center of Venta, once a jewel of the Olmec world, begins to feel the cold touch of silence. The rhythmic thud of the stone carver's tools has ceased, and the grand plazas, which once echoed with the footsteps of thousands, grow quiet under the relentless humidity. This is not a sudden explosion of violence or a cinematic collapse, but rather a slow, agonizing exhale, a gradual fading of a light that had burned brightly for nearly a millennium. As we look back through the layers of sediment, we see that the earth itself seemed to turn against its keepers. The Olmec were masters of the water, building their lives around the complex network of rivers that nourished their maize fields and transported their massive stone monuments. But water is a fickle deity. Geologists and archaeologists, using the science of stratigraphy, the study of rock layers and soil to map out the passage of time, have found evidence that the very rivers that gave Venta its power began to shift their paths. Silt, carried down from the highlands, choked the waterways, turning vital trade routes into stagnant marshes. The lifeblood of the city was being diverted by the slow, indifferent hand of geology, leaving the great earthen pyramids isolated and the people searching for a new horizon. Meanwhile, the distant mountains to the south and west began to stir with a violent energy. The Olmec lived in the shadow of giants, and periodic volcanic activity likely cast a literal and metaphorical pall over their civilization. Ash falls, thick and grey, would have smothered the crops, turning the vibrant green canopy into a ghostly, monochromatic wasteland. One can imagine the priests standing atop the Great Pyramid, watching the horizon glow with an unnatural fire, wondering if the gods had finally withdrawn their favour. It is a sobering thought, that even a culture capable of moving 20-ton blocks of basalt across swamps is ultimately at the mercy of the tectonic plates shifting beneath their feet. And so, the migration began. The Olmec did not simply vanish into thin air, they drifted, their culture bleeding into the surrounding landscapes and blending with the rising powers of the highlands and the eastern forests. We see the echoes of their genius in the Epi-Olmec period, centered around sites like Tres Zapotes, where the tradition of the colossal heads continued, though perhaps with a different aesthetic, a different soul. The artistic language was changing. The bold, naturalistic curves of the early masters began to give way to more rigid symbolic forms. It was a transition into a new era, one that would eventually pave the way for the early Maya and the Zapotec, who would take the seeds of Olmec writing, mathematics, and calendar keeping and grow them into the sprawling empires of the Classic Age. But what of the heads themselves? As the people departed, the jungle moved in with a terrifying speed. Lianas and vines, thick as a man's thigh, began to coil around the basalt brows of the forgotten kings. The humid air and the acidic soil began their slow work of erosion, though the basalt held firm, a testament to the durability of the stone chosen so carefully centuries before. Year after year, the tropical rains washed sediment down from the crumbling earthen mounds, slowly burying the monuments where they stood. The colossal heads, once the focal points of grand processions and sacred rites, were gradually swallowed by the mud. They became part of the subterranean world, hidden beneath layers of leaf litter and river silt, their sightless eyes staring into the darkness of the earth. To the few hunters or travellers who might have stumbled across a patch of exposed stone in the centuries that followed, these were not the portraits of ancient rulers, but strange natural outcroppings, or perhaps the remains of giants from a forgotten creation myth. The memory of who they were and where they had come from began to dissolve into the mist of local legend. The African connection, the tales of seafaring giants, the complex genealogies of the Jaguar kings, all of it was compressed under the weight of deep time. Radiocarbon dating, the method of measuring the decay of carbon isotopes to determine the age of organic material found near these sites, tells us that by 300 before the Common Era, the Olmec heartland was a shadow of its former self. The great centres were abandoned, and the knowledge of how to move such stones was seemingly lost. It is a haunting image, these massive, silent faces, perfectly preserved in their earthen tombs, waiting for a world that had forgotten them, to find them again. They rested in the cool, dark soil for over 2,000 years, while empires rose and fell above them, while new religions crossed the oceans, and while the very shape of the continents was reimagined by mapmakers. As the forest deepened and the rivers found their new channels, the Olmec became a ghost civilization. Their influence was everywhere, in the jade masks of the Maya, in the feathered serpents of Teotihuacan, in the very concept of the ritual ball game, but their name was lost. They were the Rubber People, a title given to them much later by the Aztecs, a name that reflects only a fragment of their reality. The stone giants remained the only true witnesses to the glory of La Venta, held in the tight embrace of the roots and the clay, keeping their secrets while the world moved on into the light of a new and different history. The encroaching green had won, or so it seemed, as the silence of the forest settled over the mounds, leaving only the wind to whisper through the mahogany trees where once the voices of 1,000 craftsmen had risen in a chorus of creation. The soft hum of a modern engine replaces the rustle of the jungle canopy as the giants finally begin their slow journey out of the shadows. For centuries they were anchored to the earth by their own immense weight, but the 20th century brought with it the steel cables and hydraulic lifts of a world that was suddenly, feverishly, hungry for its own past. As the heavy basalt faces were hoisted from the humid lowlands of San Lorenzo and La Venta, the mud of the ages fell away in thick, dark clumps, revealing the pristine texture of the stone beneath. These icons of a lost era were not destined to remain in the silence of the forest, but were instead carried toward the bright, polished halls of civilization, finding new homes in the Museum of Anthropology in Jalapa and the open-air gardens of Villahermosa. In these modern sanctuaries, the heads are no longer hidden by the encroaching green, but are bathed in the deliberate glow of gallery lights or the curated sunlight of park paths. To walk among them now is to feel a different kind of weight, not the physical mass of the stone, but the heavy burden of identity. For the people of Mexico, these colossal visages have transcended their roles as archaeological curiosities. They have become the bedrock of a national soul. They are the cultura madre, the mother culture, the foundational layer upon which every subsequent civilization, the Maya, the Zapotec, the Aztec, was built. When a visitor stands before the smooth, rounded helmet of a head in Xalapa, they are looking into the eyes of the very beginning, a moment in deep time when the scattered tribes of the river valleys first coalesced into a power capable of moving mountains. The relocation of these monuments was a feat of engineering that mirrored, in some small way, the Herculean efforts of the Olmec themselves. To move a single head, weighing 20 tons or more across the modern Mexican landscape, required a delicate dance of machinery and human will. And yet, as they settled into their new pedestals, the mystery did not dissipate. If anything, the sterile environment of a museum only heightens the strangeness of their features. In the quiet of the afternoon, when the crowds thin and the air grows still, the debate over their origins continues to flicker like a candle in a draughty room. The alternative histories that once whispered of African voyagers or lost continents have not vanished. They have merely migrated into the vast, digital landscape of popular culture. We find these theories echoed in documentaries, in novels, and in the restless corners of the internet, where the desire for a more exciting past often outweighs the quiet evidence of the soil. There is a persistent fascination with the idea that the Olmec were not of this land, a yearning to connect the Americas to the distant shores of the Nile or the Mediterranean. This impulse is understandable, born from a sense of wonder at the sheer impossibility of what the Olmec achieved. It feels more comfortable, perhaps, to believe in a secret global brotherhood of pyramid builders than to accept that a group of people, isolated by vast oceans, developed such profound sophistication entirely on their own. And yet, to look for the Olmec's genius elsewhere is to risk missing the true beauty of their story. As we gaze upon the basalt lips and the broad, powerful noses, we are reminded of the importance of respecting indigenous craftsmanship. The heads are not puzzles to be solved by looking toward the east or the west. They are the triumphs of a people who understood the rhythm of their own rivers and the spirit of their own stones. Every indentation, every polished curve of the cheekbone is a testament to a local mastery of geology and art that required no outside intervention. The stratigraphic layers, the distinct blankets of earth that archaeologists carefully peel back like the pages of a book, tell a consistent story of local evolution. They show us the gradual transition from simple clay figurines to the monumental stone carvings that now define the region. The fascination with alternative histories, while often well-intentioned, can sometimes act as a veil, obscuring the actual hands that swung the stone hammers. When we insist that the Olmec must have been someone else, we inadvertently silence the voices of the ancestors who actually lived and died in the Tabasco lowlands 3,000 years ago. The true legacy of the colossal heads lies in their stubborn, physical presence. They are here. They are real. They were carved by people who saw the world through a lens we can only begin to imagine, a lens shaped by the jaguar's cry and the rising of the seasonal floods. Meanwhile, the museums that house these giants have become more than just storehouses. They are cathedrals of memory. In Villahermosa, the Parque Museo La Venta allows the heads to breathe under the open sky, surrounded by the tropical flora that would have been familiar to their creators. Here, as the damp heat of the afternoon settles over the path, one can almost forget the paved roads and the city sounds just beyond the gates. The heads sit in a perpetual state of contemplation, their expressions neither smiling nor frowning, but fixed in a state of eternal focus. They watch the modern tourists with the same stoic patience they once offered to the Olmec priests. As the years pass, the science of archaeology continues to refine our understanding using ground-penetrating radar and chemical analysis to peer beneath the surface without disturbing the earth. We learn about their diet, their trade routes, and the complex social structures that allowed a single ruler to command the labor of thousands. But even with all our technology, the why remains elusive. Why these specific faces? Why this specific scale? The heads remain a bridge between the known and the unknowable. They represent the limits of our reach into the past, reminding us that for all our data and our carbon dating, there are parts of the human experience that are simply lost to the wind. The ongoing legacy of the Olmec is a reminder that history is not a static thing, but a living dialogue between the present and the deep past. Every generation looks at the colossal heads and sees something of themselves, their own aspirations, their own mysteries, their own questions about where they belong in the grand tapestry of time. The fascination with the African connection or other diffusionist theories is simply one chapter in that dialogue, a reflection of our modern, globalized world trying to find a common thread in the ancient one. But perhaps the most profound thread is the one that connects the modern Mexican child looking up at a basalt giant in Xalapa to the artisan who first felt the spark of an idea while staring at a raw boulder in the Tuxtla Mountains. And so, the giants remain, unmoved by the theories that swirl around them like autumn leaves. They have survived the collapse of their civilization, the burial of their cities, and the long, dark centuries of forgetfulness. Now, in the light of the 21st century, they stand as guardians of a history that belongs to the earth itself. They invite us to slow down, to breathe, and to consider the vast stretches of time that lie behind us. In their presence, the frantic pace of the modern world seems to falter, replaced by the slow, steady heartbeat of the stone. As we contemplate their legacy, we are forced to reckon with the sheer scale of human potential. The Olmec did not have wheels or iron or beasts of burden, yet they left behind monuments that still challenge our understanding of what is possible. Their story is a reminder that the human spirit is not defined by its tools, but by its vision. Whether they were kings, gods, or ballplayers, the men depicted in these stones have achieved a kind of immortality that few others can claim. They have become part of the landscape, part of the national identity, and part of the collective dreaming of a world that still wonders what other secrets might be waiting just beneath the surface of the next mound in the quiet green heart of the jungle. The weight of 1,000 years is not a burden to a stone, but a slow rhythmic breath, a steady pulse that vibrates deep within the volcanic basalt, far below the reach of the wind or the rain. If you were to press your ear against the cool, porous surface of a colossal head as the day begins to fade, you might imagine you could hear the faint echo of a hammer's strike, or the rhythmic chanting of the thousands who once labored to move these many-ton giants across the swampy lowlands of Veracruz. They are the silent sentinels of a world that refuses to be fully known, standing as anchors in a sea of shifting theories and half-remembered legends. As the light softens and the vibrant greens of the canopy turn to shades of deep emerald and charcoal, the features of the Olmec faces seem to shift. The heavy lids, the broad noses, and the down-turned mouths take on a soft, contemplative quality, as if they are not merely statues, but observers, watching the slow crawl of centuries with a patience that only the earth itself can truly understand. There is a profound stillness here, a quietude that settles over the mounds of San Lorenzo and La Venta like a heavy velvet blanket. The jungle does not merely surround these ruins, it cradles them, wrapping them in vines and roots, reclaiming the stone for the soil from which it was once carved. In this twilight space, the rigid boundaries of modern science and the soaring flights of alternative history seem to dissolve into one another. The radiocarbon dating, the measurement of decaying carbon atoms to pinpoint a moment in the deep past, tells us these stones were shaped 3,000 years ago, during an era when the world was waking up to the possibilities of civilization. The stratigraphy, the careful peeling back of the Earth's layers like the pages of a dusty book, shows us where the Olmec lived, what they ate, and how they buried their treasures. And yet, even with all our tools and our data, a lingering sense of mystery remains. We look at these faces and we see reflections of ourselves, but we also see the other, a glimpse of a maritime connection or a forgotten migration that suggests the ancient world was far more interconnected than we dare to imagine. The debate over the origin of these features, whether they represent the local inhabitants of the Gulf Coast or travelers from across the Great Atlantic, becomes less of a conflict and more of a harmony when viewed through the lens of deep time. Perhaps the truth is not found in one camp or the other, but in the very fact that we are still asking the questions. The Olmec story is a tapestry woven from the threads of human ambition and the enduring power of myth. It is a reminder that the past is never truly dead. It is simply waiting for us to find the right language to speak to it. As the shadows lengthen, stretching across the humid earth, the colossal heads remain unmoved by our theories. They do not need our validation to exist. They simply are. There is a peace to be found in the unknown, a comfort in the realization that not every secret needs to be unearthed. The jungle has a way of keeping its own counsel, hiding the foundations of temples beneath moss and the graves of kings beneath the roots of the saber tree. The air here is thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming orchids, a heavy, sweet perfume that lulls the senses into a state of quiet reflection. The sounds of the day, the cry of the howler monkey, and the rustle of the jaguar through the brush, slowly give way to the steady, hypnotic drone of the cicadas. It is a sound that has remained unchanged since the first chisel touched the first block of basalt, a bridge of sound connecting the present moment to the dawn of the pre-classic period. As you drift closer to the edge of sleep, imagine the great pyramid of Venta rising like a dark mountain against the starlit sky. Imagine the basalt heads positioned at the cardinal points, acting as guardians for a people who looked to the stars and saw the movements of gods. They have survived the rise and fall of empires, the arrival of conquerors, and the slow, steady erosion of time. They have seen the younger dryas, that sudden, chilling return to Ice Age conditions thousands of years before their birth, and they have seen the warming of the world that allowed their civilization to flourish. They are the survivors of history, the anchors of a lost world that continues to dream beneath our feet. The mystery of the African connection, the legend of the bearded visitors, the reality of the master stone carvers. All of these ideas drift away like mist over the Coatzacoalcos River. What remains is the stone, cold, heavy, and eternal. The heads stand in their forest clearings, their sightless eyes fixed on a horizon we cannot see, guarding the threshold between what was and what is yet to be discovered. They are the keepers of the silence, the masters of the long wait. And as the world fades into the soft darkness of the night, we can rest in the knowledge that they are still there, watching over the secrets of the mud and the memories of the ancestors. The weight of your own body begins to feel like the weight of the basalt, sinking into the soft earth, finding a place of absolute stillness. There is no more need for answers, no more need for evidence or proof. There is only the rhythm of the jungle, the cool touch of the night air, and the steady, unblinking gaze of the sentinels. The stories we tell are merely whispers in the wind, but the stone is permanent. It is a foundation upon which we build our dreams of the past. Let the questions go. Let the debates over migration and morphology dissolve into the darkness. The Olmec have returned to the earth, leaving behind these massive footprints of their passing, ensuring that they will never be truly forgotten, as the jungle reclaims the last traces of the day and the stars wheel slowly overhead in their ancient, pre-appointed paths. The heads remain. They are the silent witnesses to the passage of time, the grand, heavy anchors of human history. Sleep now while the sentinels stand their watch, guarding the quiet green heart of a world that is finally at peace. The forest is deep, the stone is old, the mystery is complete.